Hello again and welcome back to our course on Excel 2013 Advanced. In this section we're going to start to look at the more advanced and specialized use of charts and graphs in Excel 2013. And in this first section I'm going to look at a couple of examples of types of chart in Excel that aren't really used very often but which are actually very useful, and perhaps for which the most important thing is to know what sort of situations you would use them in. So let's get started. Now let me talk first of all about the types of chart that we have in Excel 2013. If you go into the Insert Chart dialog and select the All Charts tab, as I'm sure you know, you have a list of what are effectively chart types down the left here. Now I am going to assume that for the top 3 or 4 on that list you know very well the sort of situations in which they might be used. So I'm going to assume, as this is an advanced Excel course, that you're very familiar with column charts and bar charts and the various variations on them, stacked columns and so on. I'm also going to assume that you're very familiar with using pie charts. And of course, one of the most important aspects of using a pie chart is that a pie chart is used to show how something is divided up, how some total is divided up. Whereas column charts and bar charts may or may not reflect a total. In fact, usually they don't. The other type of chart I'm going to assume that you've used is a line chart. Now in fact I will be doing a couple of line charts in a section or two from now because I'm going to talk about regression and scatter charts and so on. But I'm going to assume that you're familiar with the basics. And with all of those types of chart I'm assuming that you know how to format them, how to mark the data series, put on legends and titles and axes and so on. So I'm going to assume that you have all of that knowledge. If you don't, now is a good time to go away and catch up, because if you don't know how to do those things, a couple of the things we're going to cover in the next few sections are going to cause you some problems. Now while I'm demonstrating several of these advanced charting topics, I'm going to use 2 or 3 sets of data, and this is the one I'm going to use most. It's some sales data on some individual salespeople, dividing into 2 teams, Team A and Team B. The data is for the year 2012 and it's arranged by month, and then every 3 months there is a quarterly total for each member of the team, and then obviously I get things like team totals, and I get an overall total for the 2 teams as well. Now the first chart I'm going to demonstrate to you is an area chart. Now in many ways an area chart is really just a slick way of presenting a line chart. But in order to use area charts, particularly if you're going to use them in presentations to improve your presentations, you're going to need to know 1 or 2 very specific skills associated with using area charts, as I'm going to show you now. So first of all, let me just select the data for Andy Carruthers. I've hidden the quarterly total columns and the year total column. I'm only interested in the progress over the 12 months of 2012. So for Andy, I'll select the data like that, go to the Insert tab, and I'm going to click on Line Chart, Insert Line Chart, and it's just going to be a 2D line at the moment, and I've got my chart for Andy. Now I'm really not going to go into any detail about scales, axes, labels, legends, etc. I'm assuming that you're familiar with doing all of that. So that's what the line chart looks like for Andy for last year. Now what I'm going to do is to change the chart type and make it into an area chart. So I'm going to select area, and what I get is pretty much the same information, but many people believe that having the colour filled in underneath gives more of an impression of just how much Andy's sales have varied over time. Once again, I'm sure you know how to change the fill colour again. I'm not going to go into that kind of formatting of area charts. But where area charts from a presentational point of view very often come into their own is if you want to compare the performance of several people. Now what I'm going to do is to change the data selection and produce an area chart showing all of the members of Team A. So select data. It's currently on sheet 4, the one that I've got selected at the moment, and it's A3 to P4. I'm going to make it A3 to P8. So I'm just going to go in there, delete the 4, change it to an 8, click on OK, and see what happens. And what I now get is that rather baffling area chart there. Now, that is not an unusual type of problem to have for a 2D area chart, but one thing we can do, which very often considerably helps, is to turn it into a 3D area chart. So let's change the chart type. We're going to stick with an area chart, but of the available area charts, we're going to choose the 3D area option. We'll go with that first one, click on OK, and we get our area chart. Now, because there's quite a bit of information to squeeze in there, what Excel 2013 has done is to only label 2 of the points with salesperson names on the axis here. So let's just go into quick layout and let's go for an area chart with a legend instead. That's a little bit easier to follow. Now let's make it a bit bigger. Almost always with area charts, like most other charts, when you make them a bit bigger, you get a lot more detail, a lot more easy to see what's going on. And already you can start to see how you can get more information out of this area chart the way it is now. However, there's something else we can do here which very often helps with area charts, and that is that we can introduce some transparency, so that, for instance, if we take Andy Carruthers figures, the ones at the front, they don't obscure all of the figures that are behind them. So let me select Andy Carruthers area here. If I then right click on that and click on Format Data Series, I'll see the Format Data Series pane on the right, and I'm going to adjust the fill color. Now that's the option that I want there, and I want to go into color. Sometimes difficult to find this, but if you go down through color, look at the selected color, you can see the one that's selected there, that sort of deep red color there. If you go into more colors from that point, one of the things you get is a transparency box. And the transparency is currently set at 0%, so it's completely opaque. But if I were to, let's just try 30% transparency. Now watch what happens in the chart when I set transparency at 30%. You can see that you can now see right through Andy's figures to all of the figures behind. Now, getting that transparency level right may take you a certain amount of tweaking. In my experience, you need less transparency than you think you do, but I've just changed that from 30 to 40. If I put that back, say, to 20, let's try that. So you need to experiment, and then you may or may not need to do several of the layers in order to be able to see through to the layers behind. So if you were putting together a presentation where you wanted to clearly show through a couple of the layers further back in the area chart, you could maybe even leave them non-transparent and only make 1 or 2 of the front layers transparent. But it's very adaptable, and I tend to think of these area charts as something that I'm going to use in a presentation, so I'm prepared to spend a little bit of time on some fine adjustment to how they look in order to achieve the comparisons that I want to achieve. And just one other thing to point out about area charts before we move on. When you have a situation like this, when you have 5 apparently similar things, in this case the sales figures for 5 members of a team of salespeople, and you want to compare them, sometimes you can actually get a pretty good message by comparing them, by showing them as parts of a whole. And you can do that in an interesting way with an area chart as well. So if I go back into change chart type, what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to go for that option, which is the stacked area chart. Now watch what happens with a stacked area chart. Now what that shows me at any point in time, at any month in the year, is how much of the sales within that team is contributed by each member of the team. And although it's a little bit of a scary, looks like a bit of pop art really, the message sometimes when you present it in this way is quite interesting. So if you take a particular month, say February, you can see that the dark red part here for Andy Carruthers is quite small, whereas this sort of orangey kind of colour here, the colour for Michael DeVoe, is pretty strong. And that also will work in 2D as well. So let me go back to change area type. Let's go back to stacked area in 2D. And that can also work in 2D as well. So that's it on area charts for now. I'll see you in the next section.